the more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful and all good, that's not an uncommon pairing of powers that you might ascribe to a creator. All powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth. Volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that? So philosophers rose up and said, if there is a God, God is either not all powerful or not all good. I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go.
In a roundabout way, Neil deGrasse Tyson takes man's participation in our reality out of the equation. In other words, he's asking, where is God in all of the mayhem? Personally, I do feel a connection to my Creator, and that's all I can draw from. I can't quantify that for you or Neil deGrasse Tyson. When I leave this avatar, this body, I'll return to my Creator. But in the meantime, I'll need to navigate the minefields of a reality that opposes a greater authority or creator. And while I'm here, I can imagine and create an amazing reality for myself and those around me. First off, it will appear I'm straying from the original topic, which we've not yet gotten to, but weather is the silent 800-pound gorilla in the room, and I'll continue to return to it. It's the backdrop to everything, but it's almost like breathing. We don't notice it until it impacts us. But before we get started, I have only one question for the collective out there. Why is there always a dark cloud surrounding anyone, any entity searching for truth? Or at least a portion of the real story? Inevitably, pushback will be received when attempting to contradict anything released as news or information for the masses. And it'll be tagged with the usual tinfoil hatters, conspiracy theory, and in recent years the establishment has been very successful in combining politics with all of it. Whenever it is dissected, the ire of the establishment is pricked. So, without further ado, let us prick away.
Welcome to Clear Thinking, a program designed to help the user formulate specific ideas and concepts based on user input. The program is basically self-explanatory, but if you have any questions now or during the program, just ask for help. Try to speak clearly in a normal tone of voice, and feel free to say whatever enters your mind. What would you like to discuss?
I don't know. I just know I'm upset.
Describe in 1 or 2 words what "I'm upset" brings to mind.
I'm upset about all this stuff in my house.
Can you define stuff in my house?
All the computers.
So, you're upset about all the computers.
Yes.
Describe in detail what "upset about all the computers" brings to mind.
I don't know what's happening. I feel like I am losing control of my family, that I'm not in charge anymore. They don't come to dinner, God knows who they're with, and I'm not used to my husband at home all the time.
Describe in detail how.
I'm not finished. It scares me. They spend all their time at those things, and I don't know what they're doing or what it's doing to them. So I get strict and parenty, and I'm frustrated.
Frustrated is a key word. Would you like to?
We are being told the climate of the Earth is changing, though we know from personal experience that's what climate does. There are many moving parts within all of this, but the weather is at the core. It's the hub from which all the spokes of control emerge. The science as we know it has moved away from describing any of these changes with specific descriptors. It has chosen a wide-ranging, vague approach for reasons known only to that institution. Also conveniently left from any mention within the climate change narrative are references to weather manipulation, chemtrailing, the HARP program, or any of the physical machinery manufactured specifically for weather manipulation. Now we can explore any one of these and we'll simply be told they're benign influences at best. But why aren't they ever entered into the equation? And if weather manipulation isn't really a thing, then why was a weather manipulation treaty established 45 years ago during the mid-70s? More on that in a bit. Why can't there simply be open discourse between what's being portrayed as truth and what may oppose it? Instead, it's shouted down using catchphrases such as conspiracy theory, or what's become even more popular of late, attaching political baggage to it. Anyway, let's get started. We're all aware the weatherman can get his or her forecast wrong half the time and still keep the job. Maybe that's always been part of the scam, that's the foretelling of what is to come from Mother Nature. Quite possibly the weather is not as much an anomaly as we're led to believe. It's my uneducated opinion that earthquakes and hurricanes have been as much a weapon as any other through the century. Cyclical anomalies have most likely been used as a form of control through the centuries. As a matter of fact, when institutions such as the World Economic Forum and the UN spearhead such all-encompassing agendas such as Agenda 2030 and the Great Reset, you can bet they've given quite a lot of thought to not only the weather, but all those who've suffered her wrath.
Developments like smart traffic, smart government, smart cities. What we will see is that everything will be integrated into an ecosystem driven by big data and driven particularly by close cooperation also of governments with business, civil society, and this revolution will come at a breathtaking speed. It will be.
From the UN, a quote from the preamble on their home webpage. Quote, "We are resolved to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty and want and to heal and secure our planet. We are determined to take the bold and transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. As we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets which we are announcing today demonstrate the scale and ambition of this new universal agenda." Unquote. Maybe I'm out of line, but hasn't the collective governments as well as the elite groups around the world had the last 150 years of the modern era to end poverty and world hunger? Or as many suspect, they've engineered the last few years to set the stage and announce the plans they've been working on for the last 50 to 60 years? 100 years only takes us back to the 1920s, essentially a lifetime away, and the collective populations of the world were faced with these problems then as well. What was ever done about it? I guarantee every politician, city planner, architect, CEO, and banker knew these issues were rampant in the world, but nothing was ever done about it. The UN was formed in a post-World War II world. They knew firsthand after gathering representatives from around the world what we were all up against. In all of this, the weather has taken a quiet backseat to the world's issues. But as the military-industrial complex admits, they're decades ahead of the masses in the technology they possess. Do we really choose to believe weather manipulation is off the table? I may be reaching, but it's my belief, and I know I'm not alone. The powers that control governments and the military have handed down their technology through the centuries. The default program within our world is control. No matter what they provide us in the way of supposed change, whether it appears as a good thing or not, will always be based on control. Take the UN's Agenda 2030, for instance. They use the words sustainable and inclusive in nearly every paragraph on their bloated website content. They announce adherence to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, created in 1948. There are 30 articles within the Declaration, and as is typical in the pronouncements, they are very repetitive and nonsensical. They're also untrue. They've only had 75 years to enforce all within this declaration. Not only has none of it been done, it's all been violated in some cases by the UN itself. Don't believe it? Go look for yourselves. That's part of the collective's problem. No one holds these huge operations responsible. Here's an example from 2012. taken from the UN's site. Genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other gross violations of human rights undermine the fabric of entire societies. They can destabilize states and whole regions, threatening international peace and security. In the aftermath of such terrible events, it is essential to establish the truth about the international crimes and gross violations that took place. A people's knowledge of the history of its oppression is part of its heritage. Knowing the truth allows victims and relatives to gain a sense of closure and restores a measure of dignity." Unquote. International crimes and gross violations? Sounds like lawyer doublespeak, because we all know this goes on all across the world. Yet what has been put in place to end it all continues to fail. It's like a man admitting he needs to stop beating his wife. He establishes a plan to rehabilitate himself, continues to beat his wife, and writes about those specific beatings, all the while citing other men for their lack of responsibility. At best, it's psychotic, and it's done nothing after all this time but continue to provide lip service while obtaining massive funding from multiple countries to do so. This is only a tiny sample, and now, after all this time, they're imploring all of us to get on board with their new/old plan to make the world a better place for all. Their international human rights treaties have addressed all of the above issues. Shouldn't much of this have been addressed and fixed by now? And if not, what good are these treaties? Here's another, the Millennium Declaration, drawn up in the year 2000. The United Nations Millennium Declaration, signed in September 2000. Commits world leaders to combat poverty, hunger, disease, illiteracy, environmental degradation, and discrimination against women. So 23 years ago, this declaration was unveiled, and where are we? We're here.
After Butler retired from the U.S. Marine Corps in October 1931, he made a nationwide tour in the early 1930s, giving his speech, "War is a Racket." The speech was so well received that he wrote a longer version as a short book published in 1935. His work was considered in Reader's Digest as a book supplement, which helped popularize his message. Butler discussed how business interests commercially benefit from warfare at the expense of the soldier and citizen. Butler recommended the following 3 steps to disrupt the war racket to save American lives in the future. Making war unprofitable, Butler suggested that the means for war should be conscripted before those who would fight the war. Quote, "It can be smashed effectively only by taking the profit out of war. The only way to smash this racket is to conscript capital and industry and labor before the nation's manhood can be conscripted." End quote. He had another quote that was quite substantial. Quote, "Let the officers and the directors and the high-powered executives of our armament factories and our steel companies and our munitions makers and our shipbuilders and our airplane builders and the manufacturers of all things that provide profit in wartime, as well as the bankers and the speculators, be conscripted to get $30 a month, the same wage as the lads in the trenches get." Another quote, "The trouble with America is that when the dollar only earns 6% over here, then it gets restless and goes overseas to get 100%. Then the flag follows the dollar, and the soldiers follow the flag." End quote. Butler then delved even deeper into the evils of warfare to support corporate profit. His main insights came to light after President Woodrow Wilson threw the United States into World War I to protect the business interest of his financial and political benefactors. Quote, "I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. Looking back on it, I feel I might have even given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 city districts. We Marines operated on 3 continents."
Back to the weather. Did you know that back in 1950, the World Meteorological Organization, or the WMO, became a specialized agency of the UN for weather and climate? Yes. Its supreme body is the World Meteorological Congress. Sounds impressive. Did you know there's also yet another treaty in place to ban the use of weather warfare? Shouldn't the UN be told about this treaty so they can check to make sure we're not still being subjected to weather manipulation? This leads us to the subject of chemtrailing, which is also strongly denied by government, its agencies, and their online workhorse, Wikipedia. But unfortunately, our eyes don't deceive us, or fortunately. There are long streaks present in the skies on a regular basis, so despite their vehement denial, they even contradict themselves on Wikipedia because they do have a page referencing stratospheric aerosol injection, which is what chemtrails are. So, they're simply changing the name as the FDA did with the poisonous sweetener aspartame, now called amino sweet. But that's another story for a different day. There have been many debunking attempts. As always, they make out those who've investigated chemtrails to look like lunatics. And please stop calling them contrails. Those are two very different things. Think of it this way. In order for a human body to repair itself, the panacea needs to begin with a single cell, which then spreads to others, which make up the whole. You'll find it so much more than devoting any time to the multitude of distractions that are out there. Government will never tell you anything that might be effective in you not continuing to do as you are told. That's what it's in place for, to separate you from forming constructive opposition to it. Now, lest we drift too far from the weather, if we comprehend the mountain of information people like Jason Breshears, Archaics, and many others have uncovered, then we also have to understand the mainstream accounting of our collective history is purposeful misdirection. I fully understand most will immediately say to themselves, well, obviously the minority is wrong. But you'd also be missing the reasons they have for steering us all in the wrong direction. Here's another chunk of documented history completely ignored by the mainstream accounting.
Never find truth. All you can do is find false, drop it, and get rid of it. And eventually, when you can't get rid of any more false, what you're left with is the truth. How much false can you find? And there's lots in history. I was looking around the internet and came across the images of the 1893 Chicago World Exposition. And it blew my mind because it looked like ancient Rome in the middle of downtown Chicago. And as I looked at it further, well, here's another one in Philadelphia, here's another one in St. Louis, in Buffalo, in San Francisco, and then as soon as they were done, they tore them all down and threw them in the garbage. That just told me there's something wrong with all of these. The story of the expositions is a gigantic lie. And I think it's so huge of a lie because I think they're right at a bridge point when so many things about the 1800s that seem strange and weird, right as this sort of period ends of unbelievable strangeness, and all of a sudden these fairs spring up all over the world with impossible buildings we're talking about, which are colossal structures. Chicago built 700 acres of fair in supposedly less than 2 years. St. Louis built 1,200 acres of exposition buildings. One of the buildings in Chicago, the manufacturer's building, would house 300,000 people. There's a giant statue in the middle of the lagoon. It was called the Golden Lady. and it was known as the Statue of the Republic. It was 65 feet tall. They say it was covered in gold leaves that had copper underneath, but others speculate it was actually made out of solid gold. So you're talking 65-foot high, potentially solid gold statue. We're talking giant structures and looking like ancient Rome with towers and domes and columns and the most fine, ornate pieces to them in these record, unbelievable times. Then as soon as they're done, chuck them in the garbage. Like Jackson Park is a swamp. So supposedly they had to drive down tens of thousands of wooden stakes in order to support the weight of everything. They dug out massive lagoons, lakes. They had a canal system that ran through the entire exposition. They also had an above-ground electric train. An electric train, well, where's the electricity coming from? That's running around the park. They had a moving walkway down by the shore. Not enough people are asking, where does this technology come from?
Just to frame it, if I'm not mistaken, the Chicago Fair was the first time people had seen electric light.
Tesla's the one who got the electricity contract for the Chicago Exposition, and it was certainly more than all of the lights anyway that were in New York City at the time were at the Chicago Exposition.
Now, it must have been mind-blowing for most of those people who had only seen gaslight or candlelight at night to see that city lit up in such a way. Again, count the ways. It's 1901. We are told, whether it's true or not, the idea of being able to electrically do anything hasn't been around that long.
And this fair is bizarre. This is supposed to be Tesla's fair, where he managed to somehow move electricity from Niagara Falls to Buffalo for the fair. No one's really explained how he actually did that. And at the middle of the fair is a 395-foot-high electrical tower, on top of which, of course, is a female golden statue called the Goddess of Light. And this thing was lit up by, some suggest, 500,000 electric light bulbs. Again, when you look at the photos of this thing, it's just, where do they really get the power from?
I mean, think of what it would take today if you had a place with no electricity and no way to pipe it in, the generators that would have to be built.
For example, there's a building that went up for the Barcelona exposition in 1888. It was claimed to be the fastest built building in the world, 5,000 square meters, capacity for 2,000 guests, 600 rooms, 30 apartments, and it was supposed to be built in 53 days. This is supposed to be a time of horse and buggy. The 2-year building times are actually impossible unless the two most likely theories would be either A, they had a technology that they're not supposed to have, and it really was built in that time frame. Even if they built them, they had to build them out of marble and stone in record time, or the buildings were already there. They'd been there for hundreds or thousands of years, fixed up, refurbished, repainted, hence the term whitewashed, which is the term that was used for the Chicago Exposition, which was paint all the buildings with this brand new spray paint that they had just developed to spray paint all the buildings in record time. So you couldn't tell if anything was old or anything was new.
How long did these things tend to stay open? When they built these things, supposedly over 2 years, which is the narrative, how long were they there for?
About 6 months.
6 months for the public to come.
And then what was amazing, for example, in St. Louis, 2 days after the fair ended, they brought in a demolition team from Chicago with explosives and blew the thing up. They actually used dynamite to blow it up, and they say threw it in landfills. Things like the World Fairs shows there was a time in our past, and even not that far in our past, where humans seemed to be at a completely higher level. Human living and human knowledge were constructed into the buildings using cymatics, using sacred geometry. These fairs, they're so important to study because the history that we know right now as history was invented at the time these fairs were going on. One of their underlying nefarious purposes was to teach a historical narrative to the population that they were supposed to believe and agree with. And scarily, the world we're walking into today is in some way, has its origins during the time of these fairs.
We are what's wrong with this system. It's an extension of our collective mindset. None of this could be in place without our direct participation, our placement within a corporation, which in turn feeds the beast we live within. What does any of this have to do with the weather, you ask? Everything. While we're focusing on all the plentiful distractions manufactured by this same monstrosity, there's another plan manifesting beneath it all. It's something we consider to be as natural as breathing, nearly an involuntary component of our everyday existence. It's really the fabric of our reality, intertwined, ever-changing, but unbeknownst to us, completely controlled by this same unseen entity. Here we are at the ground zero of the conspiracy, the one component none of us would ever suspect, the banks and the weather. The control of the weather allows everything else to be easily contrived to run alongside it, using the backdrop of a worldwide pandemic, which is more and more looking like nothing is advertised. The World Economic Forum, along with the UN, has chosen this predetermined time in history to announce the Great Reset. They've decided after all this time to finally come to the rescue, but what they're really doing is ratcheting up their control.
A handful of countries will dominate. I wonder which ones they might be. A terrifying coalition of big business, big tech, and left-wing totalitarians are so confident and so brazen. I mean, they just stole the US election, so I guess they're feeling pretty chuffed with themselves, that they are now promising you will own nothing and you will be happy. What they should have added is, and we, the very rich, will own everything and be even happier. Of course they will. The great tragedy here is that Prince Charles is involved in this fascist, corporatist global push and is thereby putting our entire constitutional monarchy at risk.
Some of you out there are not interested in voting, that you're disgusted with politics, and that you think that no one in office gives a damn about your needs. I get it. And let me tell you that you're not alone in those feelings. That's how millions and millions of people feel. But in a moment, you're going to hear from people who are asking you, who are begging you to vote in this election because they cannot take 4 more years of Donald Trump, and they need your help. They can't get by on starvation wages. They can't survive without health care, and their lives are deeply impacted by the horrific levels of student debt they're experiencing. They are sick and tired of the racism that they are exposed to and a broken criminal justice system. And they know, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, that we must address the planetary crisis of climate change. These are our fellow Americans. They are hurt.
I just grabbed these clips from YouTube to show the divisive tact that all news, all media uses to constantly keep us polarized and at odds while the overall agenda continues beneath. None of this will change unless we change our minds and begin to stop participating in it with the belief that somehow we'll affect some kind of new direction using the remote control nature of voting. Why do we think both sides implore that we continue to vote? Because no matter what, they all keep their jobs and the meatpacking plant continues its harvest. All the voting ever done in history has gotten us to this place and on the brink of having nothing and liking it. Voting means voting for more of this and includes all that's been discussed and shown in this video, including the military-industrial complex's control of the weather. Believe it or don't, do we really think they'd share the tools of that control with us? We've seen the evidence of the need for a weather warfare treaty 45 years ago, which means most likely they were messing around with the weather back in the 1940s and beyond. And right now, they're talking about climate change, yet never bringing their history of weather tampering, chemtrailing, HAARP, or their other weather treaties into that same mix. Why? Well, if the weather narrative gets out of hand, coupled with the well-known closings and destruction of many food processing plants in the last few years, all of a sudden we could find ourselves faced with not only severe shortages, but the weather/carbon footprint/food production shortage may facilitate the rollout of something like this.
מדפסת תעשייתית שפיתחנו, שמיועדת להחליף משחטה. לשאלתך לפני כן, פה אנחנו טוענים את המדפסת הזו בתאי גזע, שאנחנו יודעים למעל לשריר ולשומן, והיא יודעת להדפיס טונות ביום. טונות? טונות של בשר מתורבת ביום. זה רק לשם ההמחשה, אתה תוכל לבחור את הסטייק שלך, והמדפסת תתחיל לשחרר סטייקים בקצב תעשייתי. סיריליון, אני לא יודע אם אתה אוהב יותר שומן או פחות שומן.
כך
באמצע. view order, slide to print. ופה בעצם המדפסת מתחילה לייצר סטייקים. סטייקים, הייחודיות פה היא שתאי הגזע נשארים חיים אחרי שהם מודפסים. סטייק יהיה מוכן בסביב הדקה,
דקה?
דקה. השלב פה הוא שווה ערך לשלב שבו הפרה נולדת בעצם. הפרה לוקח 2 עד שהיא נשחטת, היא מזהמת את העולם בתהליך. פה זה תהליך שהוא הרבה יותר קצר.
בלי שטח, בלי מים ובלי
בלי
תואר.
שטח, בלי מים, בלי חתימה פחמנית.
בלי פלטות, בלי כלום.
בלי פלטות ובלי כלום.
איפה הסטייק?
הסטייק עכשיו מודפס, ועכשיו אנחנו נעבור
זה המקדונלדס של העתיד.
כן, כן, זה המקדונלדס, זו הקצבייה והמשחטה של העתיד.
פאסט פוד.
וההפתעה פה בעצם אנחנו משיקים היום...
So, we get it. If climate change, fires, closing down food processing plants, and any other anomalies might lead to all food coming from one printing press, and we most likely won't even own it, they call it a problem, reaction, solution. They create the climate/problem. They direct the news, media, information, get the public's horrified reaction, then roll out the predetermined solution. Going against the natural order of things would seem to be a profound mistake. And if we find ourselves depending on a corporation to manufacture our food, who's responsible for long-term health issues? We've already witnessed Big Pharma resist responsibility for all types of drug-related issues. All drug companies were absolved of liability well before the release of the vaccines. Can you imagine a few hundred corporations manufacturing food around the world? The point is, we never want to have to depend on only one source of food. We, our bodies, are native to the earth herself, not a stainless steel drum, synthetic ingredients, or a food printer. By its very nature, lab-grown food is dead. It possesses no vitality, vitamins, enzymes, or proteins. It still doesn't eliminate the need for animals. The meats are grown from their cells. Bill Gates' lab-grown meat company just got USDA approval. No surprise there. Did you know this sector has already spent billions in research? Don't you think they could have given those billions to the billions the UN already has and started by providing shelter and food for some of the millions going without? All they have to do is read their own charter. By their own admission, lab-grown meat may never make money, says investor Lisa Feria, the CEO of the Kansas City-based Stray Dog Capital. I'm not kidding. That's the unfortunate but fitting name of this company. And what venture capital company would lose millions right from the start? Sounds more like another money laundering operation. This entire concept just reeks of the usual suspects and their ulterior motivations. Maybe you're wondering what they use to cultivate this cultivated meat, cultured meat, cell-based or cell-grown meat, or non-slaughter meat as it's quickly morphing for marketing purposes. It's called a bioreactor. Sounds nearly sci-fi, right? But it's fittingly the same machine drug companies use to make vaccines. I'm not kidding or embellishing. Now, you know what you should do? Just forget all this stuff. Because I could just be a run-of-the-mill conspiracy maniac. Maybe I'm a Trumper, a loose-wire liberal, or worst of all, I probably don't even vote. In the grand scheme of it all, changing your mind also means abandoning the comfort of the hive mind, and that could be the most difficult piece of this puzzle. Leaving the consensus is lonely. Consensus is the warm bed and a really comfortable pair of old shoes. You always know what you're going to get, and all of that has gotten us here. It's where the status quo beckons, as it always has. Constant distractions, imploring we give it our complete attention for our health and safety, which, by the way, has always been compromised by this system. Do we hold on to the prickly opposition and change our minds, or do we vote for more of the same? Possibly leaving a few dollars to our children along with a legacy of more of the same for them. This reality has never been the one that's constantly advertised to us. It's the classic bait and switch on steroids for everyone across this earth. And it doesn't have to be that way. Our powerful minds can change all of it in a fraction of the time it's taken to ruin it. It really is that simple. All we have to do is change our minds. Thank you.
Makes me so damn mad a whole lot of people speak of you as tramps. By God, they didn't speak of you as tramps in 1917 and 18. No. Let me tell you something. I've been all over the world. I've seen you fellas on the streets in Washington. There isn't this well-behaved group of citizens in the world that's sitting right in this camp. Take it from me. This is the greatest demonstration of Americanism we've ever had. Pure Americanism. Willing to take this beating as you've taken it. Stand right steady. You keep every law. And why in the hell shouldn't you? Who in the hell has done all the bleeding for this country and for this law and this Constitution anyhow but you fellas?